1 minute for John to get desserts.
About the wine.
And that, what is the dessert? Please do. So anytime anyone wants to get up, grab something.
Or North I've been working with him all day, getting all that paper this morning.
There's bottles.
He is.
Sparkling and still.
All right, we are at the witching hour. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our May preservation conversation. I'm so glad we're able to be back in person tonight. Our program is Belmont Boom, Finding North Little Rock's Entertainment Boomtown by Laura Fuentes. I'm Patricia Blake, Executive Director of the Pawpaw Quarter Association, and I'm joined by my colleague Shelley Stormo, as Membership and Events Coordinator. The magic of darn. There we go. Thank you very much, Shelley. I want to thank our donors as well as our corporate and individual members. We're able to hold our educational programs with your support. You can find a list of our corporate members on our website, pawpaw.com. If you're not a member of the QQA and you believe in our mission, preserving Greater Little Rock's historic places, we invite you to join and support the work that we do. Please go to pawpaw.com to join for as little as $35 a year, and you can also make a donation at pawpaw.com. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that we will be taking your questions at the end of the talk. Please type your questions and comments in the chat section of Zoom or in the comment section of YouTube. On to tonight's preservation conversation. I am very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Laura Fuentes. Laura Fuentes, Central Arkansas native, graduated with a degree in anthropology from UA Little Rock. Shortly thereafter, Laura pursued a career in cultural resource management and archaeology, finding employment with the military department of Arkansas at Camp Joe T. Robinson. Laura has worked on archaeological projects in the southwestern, southeastern, and midwestern United States, as well as a UNESCO World Heritage Site project in Salalah, Oman. So maybe we'll have to talk about that after we talk about the Boomtown. She earned a master's degree in public history at UA Little Rock and is currently employed as an archaeologist and lab manager at a local CRM firm, Flat Earth Archaeology, LLC. She serves on the board of directors for the St. Joseph's Center of Arkansas as their historian and archivist. Laura has been heavily involved with volunteer work, working hundreds of hours with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey and Society, and serving as a founding member of the Central Arkansas chapter. Her major research interests include post-contact archaeology of the southeastern U.S., Arkansas history, archival work, historic preservation and legislation, and public history activism. And I'm just going to add in there, I don't know if you remember this, but we met, the first time we met was when when the survey, Central Arkansas chapter came shortly after I started working at the QQA. We put together that program with Terry Wilson from the Pawpaw tribe to do one of our preservation conversations. That was kind of a crazy night. And for those of you that were there, once it got going, it was awesome. But it was kind of a crazy night, but I appreciate Laura coming in. So please join me in welcoming Laura. So thank you. Good shape. All right, come on. Well, I was showing. Yes.
Right. So tonight I'm going to share with you what I've been researching about the past 5 years or so. And if at any point you guys can't hear me in the physical audience, I'll try and scan, and if you just want to wave, I'll try and talk louder. So I don't expect that many of you are going to have heard of Belmont before, unless you just happen to be from Levy or you've heard of the old St. Joseph's Orphanage. Belmont's described as a small facility, but it's really kind of something that the word city doesn't fully articulate or describe what it was. It was this strange little pocket of commercial development that popped up right outside of Camp Pike, aka Camp Robinson, is what most of you know it as today, during World War I. What sets Belmont apart from other small boom towns is that instead of capitalizing on a physical resource such as gold or zinc, it took advantage of the captive audience and growing popularity of progressivism and prohibition in the 19-teens and 1920s. It works. Okay. So before we get into the details of Belmont, I'm going to pause and explain a little bit more about myself, which when I made this presentation, I didn't know that I was going to have a really amazing bio read by Patricia, so some of this may be repetitive. I also want to talk about why I've been working with this location and specific period of Arkansas history.
I'm just trying to get this block out of the way.
Oh, you're fine. I think that this is going to help me explain why I'm giving a talk to a group that focuses so much on historic preservation of physical standing structures about a site that has so few remaining structures still. My degree qualifies me as a historian with an emphasis in historic preservation and archival work. My professional experience builds on this, adding qualifications for historic evaluations for the National Register of Historic Places and as an archaeologist with a specialization in post-contact archaeology. I work as the lab manager for a local contract archaeological firm, and I serve as the board member or as a board member for the St. Joseph Center of Arkansas and as the historian and archivist. As a historian, I've learned that history, like gender, can be very fluid. The idea that there's a single static historical truth is not entirely accurate. History is very nuanced. Working with history requires us to engage and practice critical thinking. We work less like journalists reporting specific dates and timelines and facts, and we should act more like private investigators, kind of teasing evidence out of the various sources and information that we have. And this is exactly the kind of approach that I took when I was trying to uncover more about the history of Belmont and exactly what happened to that small development. As an archaeologist, I've heard over and over that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Archaeologists dig and examine subsurface deposits and evidences to try and answer whatever research question that we've devised. At Belmont, I never excavated anything from the ground. Archaeology is inherently a destructive undertaking. Once we excavate that site, that is the one and only chance at that point in time to capture and record and try and understand that specific data that we've excavated out of the ground. With Belmont, the need to excavate wasn't necessary for my research question. Time constraints as well as financial concerns ruled out any sort of excavations, as well as the responsibility of coordinating curations for any of the materials that may have been produced. In archives and collection facilities, there's a very real and kind of pressing problem of space and resources in the form of capital and personnel to both process and maintain the collections that are in their facilities. I've seen I've seen backlogs of materials that have been waiting so long to be processed from things that were donated that they could legally vote now. And these things are in collection facilities, unprocessed, and the public can have access to them, but it's the kind of situation where you have to know that it's there, or you have to have them crossed an archivist that knows that it's there and knows what you're researching and can help connect you to those things. So by this point, you might be wondering what any of this has to do with historic preservation or the buildings in the city of Belmont. Historic preservation is intrinsically tied to history, to archaeology, to archives, to museums, and public history. What's the point in saving any of these buildings if our communities don't care about them, don't know about them, can't access them? With Belmont, I really wanted to not only learn about the history of the physical places and structures and the people involved with them, but also to help educate the community and to see how historic preservation can help solve and fill current needs that the community that it's in has. We have a problem in history, particularly in historic preservation, and that it's traditionally a venture that's taken on by wealthy white communities, which makes sense because historically speaking, statistically speaking, these are the communities that have the ability to supply the capital, the political power, and the financial security to volunteer their own personal time and hours to help advance and fight for historic preservation. First movements in historic preservation were taken on and really founded by prominent white women that were working to preserve landscapes and buildings associated with founding fathers in American history in the 1960s and 70s. This heritage of historic preservation is something that we have to acknowledge moving forward. We have to understand how it's impacting the work that's being done now and try and decide if it may be time to incorporate different tools and techniques into our processes. With the City of Belmont, there is a unique opportunity to highlight a really interesting point in national, state, and local history in a way that can be engaging and inclusive and just kind of really useful to the surrounding community. The history of Belmont absolutely cannot be told without talking about the history of St. Joseph's Orphanage and Camp Ivy North Little Rock. I'll touch briefly on both, and like Patricia said, if you have any questions or want to know more about something specific, I'll do my best to answer those at the end. Belmont is actually the name of the hill that St. Joseph's Orphanage sits on. In 1907, the third bishop of the Catholic Diocese in Little Rock, Bishop John Morris, approached the diocese with the idea to establish a charitable home to serve the community. He imagined a home that could care for aging and infirm adults and for children that needed a stable, safe place to stay. It was designed to be a self-sustaining building and kind of campus. It was designed to be a center of learning for both practical life skills and primary education. He was granted permission, and in 1907, Morris acquired 720 acres, 4 miles north of Ben Argenta. Construction started on a 56,000 square foot Italianate villa-style structure in 1908. It took a total of 2 years to finish building the home, which altogether cost around about $170,000, which with inflation in today's dollars is about $3.7 million. During construction, 3 Benedictine nuns from Shoal Creek were assigned to the home and took residence in a 7-room homestead that was already actually on the property when Morris bought the land. An ancillary or additional small cabin was built to house the male residents. So any of the small children that were boys and a few hired farmhands. When construction finished in 1910, 3 sisters and the residents moved into the 80-room home. It has 2 large water gravity tanks providing the water, a self-contained electrical generator, its own sewage system, a laundry, a bakery, and a chapel, which was finished a few months after the main building. Morris kept around 300 acres in cultivation of the land, and about a third of that was devoted to fruit orchards. In addition to the impressive size of the farm, Morris also worked with the University of Arkansas system to conduct agricultural experiments. So like I said, the main 4 floors of the building sit around 56,000 square feet, and this does not include the attic, which runs the full length of the building, and the basement space. This building's construction deviated from the normal wood framing at the time, and instead featured concrete, brick, and steel. The red tiled roof has small dormers with air vents, which is kind of an unusual style or feature for this architectural style. It also has a cupola set in the center of the roof. The last portion of the building, like I said, was to be added on was the chapel, which when it was built, this is not a picture of it, but the original was a white Italian marble altar that was imported from Rome. Right. So 1975, the orphanage is placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it was nominated and approved based on the high degree of preservation of the original architectural style and elements, as well as its connection to the religious history and social and humanitarian movements of the era. The orphanage officially closed to residents in 1978, with estimates ranging at a little over 3,000 children having resided and been taken care of in the home from the time it opened to the time it closed. The main building has been continuously occupied and used for the last 112 years. This building has never been shuttered. It has always had some sort of occupation or use or activity. It served as a religious retreat center. It's housed writers and artists for studio spaces and retreats. It's been a women's shelter. It's been a daycare. It's hosted AmeriCorps workers, and it served as an urban art space. St. Joseph's Orphanage is one of 3 buildings remaining in this landscape that date to either before or during the Belmont time period. All right, so Camp Pike. The Little Rock Chamber of Commerce submitted bids to the War Department for one of 30 new military training centers established across the US, and they won. They beat out other cities, and in 1917, Camp Pike was constructed and opened. And again, I want to pause and take a second to explain the climate and reputation surrounding military training camps, because when this opened, it was something entirely different than what our relationship with military or bases is today. Prior to our entry into World War I, Americans, their main exposure to any sort of drafts or war was the Spanish-American War in 1898, or before that, the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. So why did the government, specifically the military department, become so invested in educating and dictating what kind of entertainment the troops could engage in? Military training posts weren't necessarily viewed as the best neighbors. Yes, they could bring a large influx of population and cash into the local community, but they were also seen as centers of debauchery and centers for illicit vices. A news article published in 1917 in South Carolina about a training center complains that the incoming soldiers, and this is a direct quote, were sure to look with evil and designing eyes upon the heedless and indiscreet girls of the whole community. They were sure to fall foul, get drunk, stir up ill feelings, start roughhousing on any excuse, and viewed thoroughly with this image of the soldier. When there was many of them mobilized anywhere nearby, conservative communities of sensitive regard for the higher values and morals in life should scorn the money profit that might be in the coming of a big military camp and seek escape from the imposition. Those are some harsh words. That's not a lot of love and affection for the good old boys going off to war. And in fact, during this point in time, if you were a local girl walking down the street in the company of a uniformed soldier, you would face general abhorrence and shame. Your community, your family would have it made known that you were walking down the street with a soldier. And when you think about it, in this element, in this time and day, it kind of makes sense because you have small communities that are near training camps where essentially hordes of young men, and I say young men, you're talking about teenagers, boys in their late teens and their early 20s that have been cut loose from home, probably for the first time in their lives ever, are all alone, unsupervised in communities that they have no emotional attachment to and no familial ties to. So, enter the Commission on Training Camp Activities, which I'm just going to call the CTCA for short. Women, mothers, sisters, aunts, everybody's mom that had a pen, put it to paper, and they wrote editorials, complaints, letters to senators, and even the president, expressing concerns over the physical and the spiritual health of their dear family heading off to war. The commission was created to basically babysit this large group of teens and young adults. Progressivism and prohibition were taken off, and mothers wanted to know exactly what the federal government was going to do to make sure that their boys came home with all their limbs intact, no venereal diseases, and no drinking and gambling problems. The CTCA coordinated with the YMCA, or the Young Men's Christian Association, to develop and improve educational classes. They built libraries, theaters, shows, and other entertainment and activities, both on and off camp. Although at first they hoped that all of these things would kind of entice the troops to stay on their post, it very quickly became clear that it was not going to happen that way. So social hygiene programs were organized, and there was even a civilian component that they would offer in the communities for the young women in the communities. And these programs were taught mainly to teach the soldiers how to interact, how to behave themselves when they went off post. The classes taught on topics such as the moral dangers and physical dangers of drinking, gambling, women, and were honestly an attempt to recreate the soldier's reputation. So this slide, it's got some ads that I pulled, which are from and for businesses that were in Belmont. And this little chart over here on the side, it shows you a breakdown of the types of businesses in Belmont. The other is the largest because it contains a lot of things that were unique, like cigar shops. There was only one cigar shop, or one tailor, one cobbler, those kind of things. So this is where Belmont comes in. a group of 6 local businessmen organized and filed papers to incorporate the Belmont Development Company and the Belmont Hotel Company. The company was formed by Judge Allen Hughes of Memphis, Robert G. Allen, who was a former major league player for, I think it was the Boston Beaneaters, Pulaski County Sheriff W.G. Hutton, who was most well known for attacking the saloons and the whorehouses on Washington out in Argenta, and T.I. Davis, W.L. Smith, and W.G. Erskine, which less is known about. This group of men capitalized on the huge incoming population at Camp Pike and the military's new interest in safe, clean, and wholesome fun. And keep in mind, during this time, Little Rock's basically shut down from the blue walls on Sundays. So if you're a soldier and you're off duty and you want something to do, you have Friday night and Saturday to get it done. And that's going to require anything that you want to do in the city is going to be a taxi ride, which is expensive, or a train ride into either Argenta or across the river. So Belmont Development Company leases 320 acres right outside of Camp Pike, right outside the front gates. Soldiers can now walk to Belmont. They don't have to spend the fare. So now they've got more pocket change to spend at Belmont. Another thing that really I feel helped Belmont kind of take off so fast and garner the investment that it did was a company, a development company, an investment company, and businesses that were run by locals. These were people that knew the area, they knew the politicians, they knew the local business leaders and the laws. The CTCA is a federal program that's staffed by what are seen as outsiders. And it actually leads to conflict in Little Rock concerning local traditions or the blue laws relating to observance on the Sabbath. What happened was the CTCA they organized a big outing for a bunch of soldiers in Camp Pike. They wanted to go take them to see a movie on Sunday, and all movie houses were closed on Sunday. And they started pushing people, and people pushed back. It was a big thing. The major feature of the city of Belmont was the Belmont Hotel. It's unclear if Bishop Morris was either politely asked by the War Department for the orphanage building, or if he offered the land and the building out of an overflowing of his patriotic duty. Either way, in 1917, an additional $50,000 was spent renovating the space and changing it up, getting it ready for hotel and hospitality service. New plumbing, electrical lighting, and landscaping are just a few of the additions. Modifications to rooms were made, creating divisions where some weren't before previously, or adding amenities such as like a wet bar for a gentleman's smoking room. The hotel was designed to accommodate officers and their families, but as the war raged on, lower ranking families, soldiers and their friends were offered rooms as well. In the later years, as the war winded down and less people were coming into Camp Pike, the hotel started to offer rooms to rent on weekly and monthly basis to civilians. The hotel officially opens for service in October of 1917. This is the only map I have seen of Belmont. The roads are supposedly laid out to kind of highlight and complement the local topography. The little red building right there underneath the inn is the St. Joseph's Orphanage. And in this little triangle space right up there above the little yellow YMCA is about where the back gates are for it. So it looks big, but when I started looking at the actual landscape, it's amazing how just kind of contained and small of an area it was. And I think maybe that will make more sense when you see some pictures of it. So 320 acres were broken into lots, which were auctioned off September of 1917 to local entrepreneurs. W.G. Erskine was the first to buy a lot, and he decided to build a cigar and candy shop. Pfeiffer's was the second, and Pfeiffer's, if you don't know, is basically the department store that was taken over by Dillard's. So they built the $5,000 building for Camp Pike branch of their downtown department store, and it was located really close to the back gate. So overall, I've found mentions of about 35 unique businesses that operated during the time Belmont was active. There were 3 pool halls, at least, shoe shop, penny arcade, a moving picture theater, a live action theater, a watch, a jewelry store, multiple photo studios, several cafes and restaurants, a roller skating rink, a bank and baseball park, a tailoring shop, and multiple souvenir stores. Additionally, a passenger depot for the Missouri Pacific Railroad line was built to aid with incoming tourists, and it hosted a post office for Belmont. A stable and auto garage was also built somewhere located in the city for hotel guests. Okay, so let's look at some of these gorgeous pictures of Belmont. So what you have now, you can see right above the Hippodrome, the building in the back behind it is the Hotel Belmont. And this is one of, I think, 2 or 3 pictures that we have of the city, and that's it. That's all I've ever found. So you've got the tailoring shop, and if this building behind it, if you have access to one of the really good scans of this panorama, you can actually zoom in really close and see people skating in it. And so that's a skating rink. This is the back gate of Camp Pike. So these little stone square buildings for the guard post. And this is the only picture that I've ever seen of the Pfeiffer's department store. It's not a lot of it, but we can tell from the layout that it was kind of a really strangely shaped building from where it's sitting on the property. This is the Army Bank, which after the Army Bank closed, I think this building housed a branch of the Christian Lutheran Brotherhood. And the building that's highlighted or circled behind it is a water gravity tank. So this is one of the buildings that you can still go and see that dates to, which I think this dates to before Belmont. This is what it looks like now. It's actually on Camp Pike property, so you can drive by and, yes ma'am?
I'm curious, dirt roads, right?
Yes, dirt roads. So you can actually drive by and look at it as close as you can get unless you have a military pass. And here's the close-up. It's kind of hard to see. This is one of the buildings that we know it was there, have no idea what was in it. It could have been one of the candy stores, souvenir stores, but we know that they did serve beverages and snacks because it's got an advertisement for Bevo, which is, I can't imagine that it was very good, but it was a non-alcoholic beer that was the alternative for going out and, kicking back some drinks with the boys afterward. And the little Army souvenir store also.
What's the date of that photograph? The one that's on the screen now.
I'm not sure that I've ever really seen a date for these. Have you, Deanna? No? It's got to be somewhere between, very small range though. Yeah, no, it's got to be somewhere between 1917 and I would say 1920. Yeah. These are a few of the pool halls. So you have the Dixieland, the Pike, and if you really want to know the names of the other ones, I can dig it out of my computer archives. But one thing to notice, because I'm going to bring it up later, is this ditch that they've got bridges going over, because that was one of the ways that I helped to figure out where these were. This is the Officers Club. This is extremely close to Camp Pike. And I'm not sure if I got the picture in here or not, but basically where the blue computer screen is, this is the Hotel Belmont. When it was built, it was described as being the nicest officers club building in the entire United States. Like they pulled out all the stops for this. Unfortunately, it was only around for maybe a year and a half and it caught fire and was a complete loss. This is another one of the pictures where you can see Belmont. So you can see kind of the funky, I'm over here, the funky shape of the Pfeiffer's department store. You've got the pool holes, you've got the hotel circled up there. This is skating rink. You've got the tailoring shop over here, cafes heading that way, and the hippodrome right there. There are a couple buildings that we've not really been able to identify or locate. One of them that I have questions about is this very residential looking house right there. But it's kind of neat to see the way that it was laid out. And I mean, it was something. I mean, it wasn't just like this small little like tent city that they threw out. People put money in this, they put buildings up, and it was gone in such a short amount of time. Okay. The next question that I had was, after kind of getting into all this, was how do we as historians archaeologist, archivist study something that's so ephemeral like Belmont. So what I did was I designed a project that incorporated a little bit of archaeological fieldwork, a whole lot of archival research, public outreach, and GIS work. For those of you unfamiliar with it, GIS is a term for Geographic Information Systems and is used mainly in mapping applications. Specifically, I looked at light detection radar or LiDAR scans of the area to try to identify any features or anomalies in the landscape that could potentially be associated with Belmont. A pedestrian survey, I used a pedestrian survey where I walked the property and at specific points did a visual check of the ground surface for any visible artifacts. And I used that to try and test those areas that I pulled out as maybe potentially having something relating to Belmont. I relied on this map of the roads that I showed you earlier within Belmont to try to verify possible locations of former businesses on the modern landscape. And this map does need to be updated and adjusted a little bit. After talking to an archaeologist with NRCS and kind of looking back at the landscape of the data, it needs to be fixed. We know that some things are not in the right places, like, I know that Bifrost needs to move up a little bit. That's here. So what we're looking at on these maps is an attempt, like I said, to relocate the buildings and their foundations and try and figure out what exactly was where. So this is a map that I made. It shows you the grid system that I created. The areas highlighted in green are the areas that I pulled out from the LiDAR as containing maybe potential features in the landscape. And I wanted to go and actually look at them on the ground and see what was there. The areas that are purple and have numbers for systematic and maybe small statistical analysis, I pulled 6 units out of the entire grid at random and selected those to be investigated on the ground too while I was looking at the areas in green. Out of the 6, I could only look at 3. 1 was in a road and 2 on the far eastern side are actually located on private property and were not accessible at the time. So pedestrian survey is basically a fancy way to say that I walked in systematic lines set at certain intervals, and every so many feet I would lay down this little fancy grid on the ground and I would record what I saw. Because of the season, ground visibility was low, but not completely zero. The picture of the grass is a picture of what most of the land looked like that I was walking through. So this is an example of like the conditions during the survey, and these are artifacts that were recovered during a previous archaeological investigation at the site. So you can't really see it in this picture, but it's a spoon that says US, so either military issue or belonging to probably military issue or associated with the US Cafe. Got a ceramic insulator and then a very cute tiny little creamer for like hospitality service. All right, so now we'll get to look at this for a minute while I talk. So as I suspected, areas that had heavy traffic and where we really kind of knew where businesses were yielded the highest artifact counts. I did not collect anything that I saw. I was able to locate 2 areas that had concrete foundations. One's associated with the Bifrost department store and the other one is with one of the cafes. Most of the information that I was able to gather on Belmont comes from archival research.
Laura, how big is that grid? I mean, what is the scale of it? A foot by a foot or 3 feet by 3 feet or?
I think it's 5 meter by 5 meter.
Oh, it's big.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Because that's the whole property, so that's 63 acres. Yes, 63 acre grid. Okay, so.
Sorry, I didn't.
No,
I'm
you're
just trying to
fine.
get a sense of how big that was.
It was a lot. Yeah, I did a lot of walking that day. Okay, so most of the information that I did find, in addition to going out and looking, came from archival research. The Catholic Diocese of Little Rock has an archives, and they had a few documents. Central Arkansas Library's archives, the Butler Center, checked with the National Archives, the War Department's archives, the Military Museum at Camp Robinson, and the Cultural Resource Management Office. All kind of offered pieces and little tidbits of information that really helped me be able to explain Belmont more like this. Could there be intact deposits from Belmont below the surface? Maybe, possibly. probably unlikely, because the land has been used so intensively and in so many different ways throughout the years. At this point also, what really needs to happen is instead of excavating the ground, somebody needs to excavate out of the archives the property records, the tax records, the financial records that relate from where businesses in Belmont were paying taxes or portions of their revenue directly to the War Department. I know that these records exist somewhere, I just haven't been able to find them. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a chunk of concrete. It's kind of hard to see, but it's got a shape that kind of goes like this, and it is more than likely the stoop to the front of the Viper's department store. So this is one of the pieces that's still there. This one is a large concrete foundation. The little square, the yellow square over there is a meter by a meter, so it's about get big, and it goes all the way up past the edge of the picture. So substantial foundation for a building. This building was meant to be there for a hot minute. And like I said earlier, you've got the ditch. So you've got the ditch where the pool halls were set. And when the grass is mowed, and you can kind of sort of see it on the LiDAR, the radar scans of the ground, where there's little divots from where the buildings were. I set out to see what, if anything, from Belmont remains. Long story short, not a whole lot at this point. My running theory is that the structures were sold or dismantled or repurposed either by the returning orphanage or by individuals that had built them. And I think that most of the buildings were probably sold off in a similar fashion to Camp Pike. The reason I think this is the public announcements for liens, bankruptcies, foreclosures, and the sale of commercial shop fixtures. It seems likely that the family businesses were either forced to close and liquidate their assets to settle any outstanding debts that they had, or that their creditors came in and did it themselves. The table that you have that you're looking at is a count of all of the artifacts that I observed over the 63 acres and all the survey that I did. It's not, I mean, it's not like there's just this minefield of things out there. And I really do think that that's probably because it's an active farm. It has been for 112 years. And it was an orphanage. And we know for a fact that the nuns were fond of taking kids that had idle hands and making them go out in the fields and clear them, either pick up rocks or things like that. So it's likely, I think that it's a likely explanation that if there was any debris from these buildings, that the nuns and the farmhands or the children would have gone and cleared it to use the land again. And so you've got also massive chunk of concrete, which I'm not sure what that goes to, but it's building related. Don't know what part, but it's there. And an example of some of the artifacts that are worth seeing. So you've got the base of a little ceramic coffee mug for hospitality service. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's some brown and green glass in that picture too. When I started this project, I wanted to create something that could be an aid to help get the history of Belmont out to a wide audience. I didn't want my thesis to be printed and just kind of sit on a shelf, or to write articles for really prestigious academic journals that only a handful of people read. I created this virtual exhibit on Belmont. I designed the site to be hopefully easy to navigate, accessible to a wide audience, and clear and easily understood by people at multiple reading levels. It's not a very academically worded site. It should be easy for, I think my target audience was 7th grade and up. Additionally, projects that are in the works to kind of help get the word about Belmont out are, we've got a walking trail, which I think, yes, okay, it's in the right spot. Okay. We are opening a walking trail very soon. I'm not entirely sure when, but that lady can tell you the date, which goes around St. Joseph's property, but also this traces the entire outline of the city of Belmont. So we've got this that's gonna be opening very soon. So a way for people in the community that can come and use and visit the farm space and be active, got access to the property. And additionally, one of the things that we'd like to develop is try and incorporate some of the areas in Belmont and highlight those on a self-guided walking tour. I've also been asked to develop a self-guided walking tour of some of the property that's not specifically on this trail and the main building itself for the Harvest Host program, which if you haven't heard of that and you have an RV, you should check it out. I occasionally give talks and presentations on the topic, and I'm also working on updating the Encyclopedia of Arkansas entries for Belmont and the St. Joseph's Orphanage. Looking towards the future, out of the 3 remaining buildings, the St. Joseph's Orphanage commands the most attention and pressing need for historic preservation. The structure is almost 115 years old. Estimates for comprehensive rehabilitation sit around 14 million. The most pressing concerns to the structure, and which I want to remind you again that this thing has been in continuous use for the last over 100 years, are things like updating electrical wiring, external window restorations. You can actually adopt a window at the orphanage and pay to have it done. Restrooms, you can adopt a toilet, you can adopt a shower, a sink. We'd like to put in LED lights. We'd like to update the air conditioning and help make it more bearable in these hot days and summer months. The porches are no longer attached. We would like to reattach those. We would like to open the elevator back up. At one point it was surveyed or inspected and deemed not up to par. So they had us close the doors and drop it. The elevator is still there. It can be reopened. It's just going to take a lot of money. We'd like to update the mechanical systems as well, make it American with Disabilities Association or Act compliant and fire safety compliant. And also, most buildings over 100 years old, you have to worry about hazardous material abatement. So these are the 2 water gravity tanks that sit in the attic, and they're monstrous. And this is one of my favorite things in the building because it really, when you see it, it's shocking because they're so huge and they're steel and they're on the top floor, and the amount of engineering that has to happen to support that load, especially when it's full of water, it's incredible. Another one of my favorite things, this is just like a slide of my favorite things, I guess. The original fireplaces. So they have the original glazed tiles, and we have some of the original covers. The building really is something else. Architecturally, historically, and visually, it contributes on several levels to national, state, and local history. And it really deserves all the love and attention that we can throw at it. The St. Joseph Center of Arkansas is invested in caring for and preserving this building, but also in developing ways to advance their mission and return the property to useful, meaningful service to the community. I'm really proud to be a part of helping to advance that mission. And honestly, I personally just had a lot of fun really learning and working with this site. So thank you for your time and attention. I hope maybe you guys learned a little bit tonight. If you're ever in the area, I really recommend that you check out the seasonal farm stand. There's always more things than I have money to spend in there. There's also classes if you want to learn how to make jam, volunteer opportunities. You could feed the goats, collect eggs, wash chickens, or historic building tours that happen the 2nd Saturday of every month. And thank you to everybody who helped me along this project. And if anybody has any questions at this point, I'm trying to answer them. If I don't know, I can try and get back to you because I don't know everything. So.
Stop sharing the screen, but if folks have questions, go ahead. I have a couple things I'm curious about, but I'll let you all talk first. And then Shelley will monitor what's online.
Sweet.
Yes.
Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
You know that nobody knows about this, right?
Exactly. That's why I do this. I'm not
Nobody. I work at a
in this area, and I've never heard of it.
I mean, I served in the
Democrats
military
have a lot
on the base and I never even heard this story.
Nobody has heard about
I went to go yoga there.
And the farm. And here's the thing too, too.
Yeah, y'all need to go yoga and you can start there. But I didn't know about the rest of it. I was just there for the goats.
It's really fascinating and and I don't know if it was just because it was there for such a short amount of time.
Why was it such a short time? I missed that part.
I mean, we have best guesses, but we're not really sure. It could be either that it declined because the war ended and you didn't have the troops coming in and spending the money to support the businesses. It could also be that maybe people in Argenta in that area weren't on the prohibition and progressive vote the same way. Maybe they just didn't want that kind of flavor of entertainment and went other places. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
We haven't figured that out yet. But we know by 1930 aerial imagery shows it's gone.
One more question, no memories from soldiers passed on through their
I've been
families?
looking. I've made posts, and that was part of the social engagement and outreach that I did, was I made posts on every single World War I website,
Yeah.
Facebook group, anything that I could find online, asking if anybody had any family that had any memorabilia or letters or anything that mentioned Belmont or the Hotel Belmont, and none. The little hotel key, which, oh well, it's gone. Yeah, no, that's great. That's the only physical artifact that I've ever seen that relates to Belmont, the city or the hotel, is that little key fob. It says
Where did you find that?
it was in the St. Joseph's Orphanage building when I got there. So who knows? The nuns kept it. Yes.
I'm curious about, and you may have said it and I just missed it, what happened to the children when the Hotel Belmont was?
I did not say that. I forgot to mention that. No.
Okay.
The children, they were moved to St. John's Seminary because it had just been
Oh, and the
vacated.
Heights.
Stayed in 12.
State Street.
Yeah,
downtown.
So they moved there. Bishop Morris bought some more farmland out in Prothrow Junction. So he replaced the farmland that they couldn't use up there with Prothrow Junction, and they stayed out there until 1921 or 22 when they moved back in.
Another thing I was curious about was, could civilians come to Belmont or was it exclusively for the soldiers? And were there anything like our Belmont at some of the other training camps that you have found?
So it was open to civilians, and that was actually highly encouraged. Some of the ads, which I don't have pictures of them up on the slides, but they talk about bringing your mom out for, a good home cooked dinner or something like that. So it was very family friendly, very oriented towards both attracting the soldiers and the tourists that were coming in to visit people at Camp Pike. And I mean, second question.
I was curious about if you found any comparable private developments outside the military installations, which is prolific today, right? But did that happen?
It was
In that same time period?
There was definitely developments, nothing that I've seen that was like this. There was things that developed and they lasted, they survived. There's absolutely nothing that I found that was so centered just on entertainment. Like entertainment was the thing. And there's an article in the Little Rock Democrat Gazette that actually calls it like Little Rock's Coney Island. So it was there. So everything else, like Jacksonville, has kind of stayed and survived. Just now,
No drinking?
no drinking, prohibition. No booze to be, I'm sure, I would be shocked if there was actually no beer in Belmont, but that was, that was the front face. Yes, ma'am?
My kids actually grew up going to retreats at St. Joseph because we go to Catholic church.
Mhm.
So where was Belmont in relation to we always call it St. Joseph Center.
No, yeah, right?
So what is the city in relation to, was the city also, was St. Joseph also part of the city? Or-
Yes, it was. So St. Joseph's, the orphanage building. So like if you're looking at the orphanage building
Right.
right here, Belmont was all the way out there, kind of heading west where the groundskeeper house is. So it ran all the way back up to Camp Pike Gates and that's why.
What about north, because there's land north as well.
Not so much north. I think most of the development was centered on the west half of the property, from what I've seen. They had plans and they had roads laid out for stuff to kind of move and migrate, but I don't think it ever made it. So yeah, so you can see the orphanage, most of it, I think, was back in that top triangle. And then from what I can tell, most things kind of stopped right there. I don't know that anything else was ever developed eastward.
And it was in an incorporated city.
I don't know that it was incorporated. All of the property records, I've looked with North Little Rock, I've looked with Little Rock, Pulaski County. I can't find any tax records, property records, records of sales or anything like that from this time period. The only thing that I could find about like the bankruptcies and liens and stuff like that were the legal announcements in the newspapers. So I don't know if the records are there, if they got burned in a courthouse fire. Who knows? Yes, sir.
I wonder if the great influenza epidemic had an impact on closing down Belmont. Have you seen anything about that? Because flu was what, 1918 to 1920?
Yeah. I know that the hotel was quarantined for a little bit, but beyond that, I've not seen it have much of an impact. And I mean, in that theory, it should have affected Argenta too, and I would assume comparable ways. Yes, sir?
I'm just wondering about the intention here, because these are solid buildings with foundations. It's not a tent city. It's not something that's going to be provisional, that's going to be taken down after the duration of the war or something like that. I was wondering, is this a unique phenomenon, or this pop up around Army posts all over the country, or was it?
I think it's unique, but also the two concrete foundations that we found are the only ones that we found, but that doesn't mean that all of the buildings were built like that, because looking at the construction on Camp Pike, a lot of it was pure foundations. And Camp Pike, when it was decommissioned, actually sold off a lot of buildings to the public, either come get it and move it or take it apart and sell it for materials. So if you have a stone foundation building, which I think probably a good chunk of them were because they were put up so fast and probably wanted to do it somewhat cheap, there's not going to be much on the landscape left after that building comes down.
And
It'd probably be easy to take down.
And if it was like Camp Pike, or even Camp Robinson during World War II, all of those buildings were built to be temporary, to be taken apart after the war, you know. The ones that did survive were purely by accident, really. But there are concrete foundations all over Camp Robinson if you drive around there today, like.
Which the concrete foundation is for bikers who did dump $5,000, which at that time is a pretty good chunk of money. I think the rest of the buildings were put in, I know some of them were put in by local families. I think there was a Jewish family that opened up a candy store, and they were probably trying to do it as economically as they could.
How long is the walking trail? 5 miles, 4 miles?
I think it's got the links on there. Hold on.
It does, it had it on there, said, they weren't very long.
Half a mile, maybe 1.5.
You know what I was thinking about too, I'm gonna interrupt David's question, is that I think it's really interesting when you started off the talk about how negative it would be to be seen with a soldier. And you know, that changed, and was it because the military propaganda machine was going and it made soldiers, you know, by World War II, there was a whole genre, right, of military movies, and it's much sexier. So you don't have that, right? I don't know, I'm just wondering why there was that change. I mean, it must have been propaganda.
And outsiders.
I think a lot of it too is,
Where's we're coming from?
yeah, just, I think the military made a very conscious effort to recreate the interactions and the reputation and the way people viewed the military and soldiers. I think they had some very effective propaganda with that after World War I. But there's a thesis that I used to look at the CTCA, the Commission for Training Camp Activities, and she talks about a lot about the military environment and interactions between the federal government and communities in the military. It's very interesting and kind of scary because there's one part where she talks about women that were found to have gone out on dates with soldiers unsupervised and without the permission of their community or family members were actually subject to prosecution. and God forbid you got pregnant by a soldier off to war. So it was definitely kind of this unique little thing in that it captured this shift in military relations with the public. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I'll just say I live in North Little Rock, but, and I've worked up there at St. Joseph's, during the, market on Saturday. And a lot of guys go up there just to get these homemade cinnamon rolls and sit around at the picnic tables and drink their coffee. But they offer, I can't even, the list goes on and on and on. To me, it's one of the best farmers markets that we have. Honestly, I also work down at the farmers market. So in comparison, really, with what they have to offer, if you don't do anything but drive up there, find it, take part in that, you can walk around the grounds and see so much just on one visit. So please do.
Well, thank you again, Laura, very much. We're gonna get her QA swag when we get back. But so think about this. We all know something. We know something that a lot of people don't know anything about. So how awesome is that? So we're thrilled that you can share your research with us. And it's just intriguing on many levels. I can't stop thinking about it. The next thing I want to do as we're shutting down is remind you that we're going to have another preservation conversation next month. It'll be Thursday, June the 9th. It's the Razorback wing of the Commemorative Air Force. And we're planning on doing it in person. If that changes, of course, we'll let you know. But we're hoping to do it in person. So we hope to see you then. And I'll just remind you too that we are having a second program in June because we had to delay the Murphy Jeffries panel discussion in February because the COVID numbers are going up at that point. So we were nervous about us all meeting in person and they were not comfortable doing it virtually. So on the 23rd of June, we will have a second one. It's the discussion with the Jeffries, two of the Jeffries sisters, and also Myron and Stephanie Jackson. They're the couple that purchased the building and are redeveloping the site. So we're excited about that. And it'll be the same. If you're not able to be here, you can come via streaming on YouTube or Zoom. And the other thing I want to mention before I let you go is we are working with the Friends of Curran Hall Little Rock Visitor Foundation to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the opening of Curran Hall as the official Little Rock Visitor Information Center. So we are just going to get together next Wednesday between 5 and 6, have some cake, have some champagne, have some lemonade, and just celebrate the opening of that facility literally 20 years ago on that date. Opened May 18, 2002. So if you're interested in joining us, just shoot the RSVP email Curran Hall VIC for Visitor Information Center at quapaw.com. We would love to see you then. And with that, I think we are done. Thank you all very much for coming.